Mark Scout's completion of Cold Harbor will be remembered as one of the greatest moments in the history of this planet.
Yes. Welcome back to our home.
Yes, I'm sorry about the last time. I'm sure that felt quite invasive.
Nonsense. What's mine's yours.
Well, it looks like everyone is experiencing a very complicated relationship with our innies and outies. From Helly and Helena and Mark to Dylan and Gretchen and of course Fields, Bert and Irving, and boy, what a very special dinner that was. A whole lot of sharing truths and lies going on this episode, but the question is, who was telling the truth and who's being left behind in the dark and being lied to? Hello to all you amazing innies and outies out there, and welcome to my deep dive breakdown and review of Severance Season 2, Episode 6. An episode where we see these characters reclaiming their identity. Helly reclaiming her body and getting the opportunity to sharing an important intimate moment with Mark S. Gretchen re-falling in love with her husband's innie. And Irv claiming a new relationship with outie Bert, which by the way, I think it's safe to say that Bert has some secrets, and I don't think we or Irv can trust him. With all that said, get your Chinese food and your ham and wine prepared because it's time for us to discuss and break down this incredible episode. Spoilers ahead. We open this episode immediately after the last episode's final moments of Mark seeing his wife as Miss Casey as he's emotionally describing what he saw to Ragabi, who tells him,
"We're making progress. It's not just waking up on a table, it's human interaction."
Now, she says to Mark that she knows that Gemma is essential, and I think we need to have the honest conversation on if we can trust Ragabi or not. Now, Ragabi tells Mark that the Gemma's still in there, and when he gets her out, it'll be them two back together again. Now, Mark mentions bargaining, which is one of the 5 stages of grieving. Now, this is where a person who's experienced loss attempts to negotiate with themselves or a higher power, often by making a deal or promise in hope to changing their outcome of a situation or reversing a loss. As Mark sees what he's doing and being reintegrated as his opportunity to getting her back. Now, we cut to what we're assuming is the same day or that morning of the same day at work, where we see Dylan telling Mark and Helly about the secret message Irv left him in the break room. Now, both Helly and Mark question why Dylan didn't take the map, as he confirms what we suspected last week of him not wanting to get caught with it and losing his visits, one of which we see in this very episode. Now, Helly still has her hall pass and plans on getting this message, but she wants more information as she mocks Dylan's bravery and he refuses to share any more details and leaves the conversation. Now, here we hear Mark mentioning how hungry he is, and as is confirmed later, this seems to be like a major side effect after getting the reintegration process started, as he looks in the refrigerator and his innie version experiences the most intense glitch between him and his outie thus far. As he looks around the office and switches between being here and at his outie's house at the same time, a sign that they're getting closer. Now, in Milchick's office, we'll see a conversation between him and Miss Wong. He brings up his recent performance review, which he tells her that he's looking forward to addressing the concerns that were brought up. But here's where we get the biggest reveal of where Miss Wong comes from, one in which a lot of you all theorized about weeks ago. Now, in this conversation, he insinuates that she was the anonymous person who brought up the issues in his review, and he reminds her that she won't graduate from this fellowship without his final approval of if she's wintertide material. Now, he tells Miss Wong that it's time for her to focus more on spending her time wisely and letting go of her childish ways. For example, he's basically saying like her snitching on him about using big words and misusing paper clips. Man, I love this tension between these two characters and the dislike they have for one another, and it's definitely undoubtedly coming to a head pretty soon. But let's backtrack and discuss what was just revealed. So, is it to be understood that she's a student of Myrtle Egan School for Girls? For those who don't remember, this is a private girls' school, and it's where Harmony Cobell attended school as a child and where they teach the ways of Kier Egan. Now, it was named after Egan's daughter, Myrtle Egan, and she was the 3rd CEO of Lumen Industries. So I guess or I should just say me, I can put away my whole she's a robot or a reanimated Gemma talk aside for now, because it seems like she's a real human being who's trying to work her way up to be a future manager like Milchick or Cobell, which by the way could speak to the way that Milchick treats her because of the path she's going on, and the role she's looking to have one day is similar to the one Cobell took, and it appears more so in this season that he didn't like the way that she led the department. It also makes me think that maybe Seth isn't a fan of the teachings of the school in general because they most likely teach them to treat the innies not like they're humans, as we've seen that he's done that in the past. So what do you all think? Was it just revealed that she is a student of the Egan School for Girls? And for that explains why Milchick doesn't like her. Now, back with Mark and Helly in the bathroom stall, he tells her what Milchick said to him in the last episode in the elevator. As Helly knows that this was just a way of him intimidating Mark, and as she's about to leave to get the map, Mark finally tells her the truth about what happened between him and Helena at the retreat. Now, at first she thought that he was referring to Miss Casey, but he corrects her and lets her know that it was Helena he was referring to as far as what happened at the retreat, and you can just see her whole demeanor completely changes. Now, this moment and her reaction to the news can be viewed in many ways, but two come to mind for me. Now, one of them being, and we'll talk about this more later, but she's clearly into Mark as he is to her, and she feels like that was a moment they should have shared together, not her outie. But secondly, this just adds to the continued tick for tack between Helena and Helly, from you're not a person to her hanging herself in the elevator to the gala and now this. Now, Mark tries to explain that he thought that it was her and he was tricked, and he tries to hold her hand, but we see Helly leaves to take a walk. Let me tell y'all something right now. I'm so glad that this reveal wasn't prolonged for weeks, because that would have been way too drawn out in my opinion. But again, I'm glad that this now is out there, and later we'll see how Helly comes up with a way to put this whole situation behind them, pun intended. Also, by the way, I love so much about this show, one of it being the beautiful cinematography, and this season has just been so well put together, but I just want to speak to the shot composition in the last few episodes. I love how the show is putting an emphasis on having reflective shots where we see characters that are looking in mirrors, or for example, we have these two characters in the stall. It makes me feel like both innies and outies are present in the scene, or more like the innies are apologizing or having to answer for the mistakes of their outies, or even the idea that there's always two sides to a story. Now, from here, we see Helly walking the hallways, and I don't know how deep or how closely you all follow this show online, but they shared this clip online a couple days ago of her taking off her shoes in the hallway, and let me tell you, people went crazy saying that her taking off her shoes just 100% confirms that she's pregnant, as if it takes days for her feet to swell up. Now, we've talked about if Helly or Helena will get pregnant this season or maybe next season as being a possibility, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But again, after what happens in this episode, I think we're going to see that conversation happen a lot more moving forward. Now, we don't get many scenes from Milchick in this week's episode, but focusing on what he's going through here and what took up the rest of his day. Now, we see him in his back office, and he takes out some paper clips and proceeds to put them in the correct way according to the review for what looked like to be hours, because you notice his hands were beginning to shake. Now, that could be because he was tired, or it could be from frustration. Now, next we see him look at the comments about using big words as he goes into a mirror and repeats what he said to Miss Wong several times earlier in the episode, and he's changing it as he goes along. Do this that way, don't speak like this, stop using these words. Little by little, Milchick is trying to remove himself from who he is to fit in this role and be the person Lumen wants him to be. Now, it's clear that he's cooperating right now just to kind of fit in the role, but it's just a matter of time before he snaps, in my opinion. Again, going back to him looking in the mirror and him saying the grow up line over and over again, to me, it just seems like he's telling himself to grow up and to put his personal feelings aside and not allow them to interfere with his work. Now, on to our other interesting innie and outie situation. Let's talk about Dylan and Gretchen on their second date, essentially. Now, we see them having a conversation with her sharing with him their first date and Dylan's in-pool scuba lessons and other phases he's went through in his life since they've been married and together. Now, a little detail I want to point out is you notice how Gretchen look is different from her first visit to now. Her first time here, she had her hair up, she wore clothes that were maybe more formal, but here she looks more comfortable, like she's wearing clothes like she's on a date, and also her hair is down. Now, I'm no expert, but normally when women put their hair down, especially on dates, it can mean that they're more relaxed, they're more comfortable, and it's a more inviting vibe. Now, she mentions that she feels that Dylan is constantly seeking new things because he may be unhappy either in his life or in a relationship. But Dylan assures her that that can't be true because when he's with her, he's super happy and just wants to converse for hours and listen to her talk about their relationship and their children, and he loves staring at her face. Now you can tell, and she even says in this scene that that made her feel good and that he's sweet, and you would imagine she feels all this because she probably doesn't hear this all the time from Outie Dylan. Now she admits to liking spending time with him, and Dylan wishes that they could be together more often and share more time in their day-to-day lives. This look right here tells me what I need to know about where her head is and how this plot is most likely going between these two characters. As Dylan asks her if it's okay for him to give her a hug again because it's one of his favorite things to do with her. Now, this very innocent moment is cut between a possible foreshadowing situation with what's happening between Mark and Helly as we see Dylan and Gretchen eventually kiss. Now, it's interesting to have those scenes cut together in my eyes because we have an Outie like Gretchen, for example, kissing her husband's innie. Meanwhile, we have Mark who had slept with Helly's Outie, and I use the word foreshadowing because this uncomfortable situation or a sense of betrayal that Mark and Helly are experiencing could be something that Outie Dylan and his wife could experience if this is ever revealed that they kissed. Which, by the way, we only saw them kiss. We don't know if it went any further. The more and more we spend time with Dylan and Gretchen, these visits make it feel like they're in prison, right? It makes it feel like these innies are actually prisoners, but we'll speak more to what the kiss means, maybe more for them moving forward. But now it's time to talk about a moment that I am 100% sure will be one of, if not the most talked about scene of this entire episode. Now we find Helly getting emotional over what she just learned as she's in the hall on the floor rethinking the kiss between her and Mark, who, by the way, is at his desk most likely thinking about him screwing up things with Helly. Now Helly wipes her tears away and goes to Mark to share an idea that she wants to have with him. Now, they run into each other in the hallway, and Mark continues to apologize, but to his surprise...
You thought it was me.
100%.
Which means you wanted to. With me.
Yeah.
Helly not only forgives Mark, but she shares with him that she wants to make her own memory with Mark and wants to do that right now in the office, and she knows a spot where they can do this. Now, she takes him to the same spot that we've seen these two before back in season 1, but man, have the tables have turned from then to now as they use the plastic to make a tent to recreate what happened at the retreat. As they enter on each side, Helly is nervous because this is her innie's first time experiencing sex, but of course Mark's living the life of a male gigolo and he just had sex with the same, well, not same person, but just a few days ago as he leads the way. Now, I don't have to go play for play, even though I'm pretty sure that there are some super fans out there of this show that's probably watching this scene over and over and over again, but they take things slow and eventually engage in the act after Mark has her consent. Now again, not breaking down the whole moment, but compared to the retreat sex scene, this moment felt more delicate, right? Like there's obviously a different scenery and the atmosphere is different, and also like the color, for example, in the retreat, it was the red background, but now we have the blue hue, and there's a little bit of insight going on with these two different colors. Obviously red being associated with passion, energy, excitement, but sometimes anger, while blue can be used and seen as calmness or trust or stability. Now let's have this conversation. Now it appears from what I've seen, at least in my comments, that a lot of you are torn between the possibility of Helly and Helena maybe getting pregnant. Now I spoke on this before with seeing the babies in the opening credit sequence and the idea that Helena can carry on the family name and the family legacy, but there's also the idea and the potential conflict of if they do get pregnant, I'm referring to Helly and Helena, who would be the mother? Now, obviously they share a body, but the idea that I'm getting at is, okay, we have Helly in this scene who could have gotten pregnant in this moment versus Helena at the retreat, and imagine Helena not allowing Helly to see the baby, and there's just so much in mind that this plot can lead into. There's even a moment where Helly herself says the word baby in this episode, so please share your thoughts on this scene, any deeper details you took away, and where do you stand with the possible baby plot happening between Helena, Helly, and Mark? Now, on a complete side note, this is just where my head's at right now after seeing this scene. Their outies have to know that something sexual happened, right? Like, I can't speak for women, but I'll just speak for myself as a man. But let's just say after experiencing a sexual encounter like having sex, there's an aftermath that indicates what happened. So Helena and outie Mark have to know, right? But again, that's just where my head's at, and I just had to share it with you all. Now, as they both share the walk of shame, we see Helly asking Mark if it was different this time around with her, as he answers her by giving her a kiss, and this is where he notices that his nose is bleeding. Now, my guess that this is a symptom to getting reintegrated, or it could be a bad side effect similar to like him coughing. Now, Ms. Wong helps him and questions if Helly punched him in the face, which isn't a far-off thing to think that Helly would do that, which I thought was just hilarious. But I also love this shot of the close-up of her fingers as she's lying about what they were just doing. Now, as she gets into the questioning and asks if he recently experienced any hallucinations, and you'll notice he puts the bloody tissue in the container as we see Annie Mark experiencing the glitching again, and he cuts between his Annie at work and Mark in the basement. As we as an audience are realizing that this exact moment was a shared memory that his outie is experiencing at the moment. Now, I want to go back to the emphasis of the camera of him putting the tissue in that container. It makes me think that Lumen will do something with it and maybe use it for something down the line. But also, these more intense glitches and crossover memories are starting to make me think that we're not actually experiencing the story in chronological order. Now, just to be clear, I do believe that we witnessed Mark's morning at work at the same time that we're experiencing him in the basement, but who's to say that those morning events weren't days ago, if not longer? Now, back in the basement, interesting that Ragabi asks him if he remembers the black hallway. Again, it makes me think that this was ahead of what we've seen as some of the office scenes are in the past. Maybe they followed the map which led him down the hallway, again, maybe a couple days if not weeks ago. Now, going back to the scene, we see Mark still has that cough, and Ragabi sees the crossover memory as a positive sign that they're getting closer, but they need to enhance to speed up the process, and there's a risk of him bleeding to death if they do so. So this is where Ragabi comes up with the idea that they need to flood the chip instead, but Mark isn't confident in her abilities to keep him alive, and he's still hungry and leaves to get a bite to eat. Now, speaking of getting a bite to eat, we enter the second half of this episode where we're invited to a very interesting ham and wine dinner between lovers. Now, we watch as Irv makes sure that his mustache is looking good, everything's looking good as he rings the doorbell and he's greeted to see a happy Bert. Now, inside, Irv meets Fields, who's being played by the incredible actor John Noble. Now, for those who are confused by this not being the same actor who played the character in the season 1 finale, check out my most recent theory video where I explain the recasting of the character. Now, as Irv walks into the kitchen, you'll notice this piece of art. Now, it was never said or confirmed in this episode, but I was led to believe that Fields is an artist. Like, he's a painter, he's the more artistic person in this relationship, and when it comes to this painting, I'm assuming that he made this painting. I googled it, I couldn't find anything about it, but we see this shaved person's head or them wearing a ball cap. But again, I don't know the meaning of it. I couldn't really dissect it. So what did you all take away from this painting? If it meant anything, let me know in the comments below. But speaking to the whole art piece and Fields being an artist, is it possible that Fields is the artist responsible for the art pieces found throughout the severed floor? Definitely a lot more to discuss about Fields and Bert's relationship with Lumen continuing on with this scene. Now, Fields makes some jokes towards Irv as he talks about his innie and what he saw in Bert is just beyond him. Now, at the table, they share a laugh as Bert shares a time that he had some paint that looked like blood thrown on him, and it was from the whole Mind group. Now, this is the first mention of the WMC since early on in season 1. Now, here is where we get one of the most fascinating conversations of the entire show, in my opinion. And that is the question to what brought Bert to Lumen. Now, Bert claims that it was Jesus Christ himself that led him to Lumen, as the story goes that they had been in attendance at a Lutheran church after what Bert calls years of being a scoundrel. Now, a little bit more on that scoundrel line in a second here, but the question to Bert's soul and what will come of it when him and Fields dies was a concern for both of them, and if Bert will go to heaven because of Bert's terrible past. Now, one day at church, the sermon was about the Severance program and how the innies have souls, pure souls, and complete individuals that aren't jaded by everyday life and can be judged by God separately from their outie. Now, Bert saw this as a sign from God, as having like a second chance at getting into heaven by the way of his Innie's innocence and purity. Man, let me tell you, there is so much to unpack about the religious undertone within this conversation, being about heaven and hell and Innies having souls, even though a lot of people in Lumen don't consider them to be humans. But the thing I want to focus on here is how Bert's past was so bad that he knew that he wouldn't be getting into heaven. Now, there's something that's huge that's revealed later in this episode about Bert's time at Lumen, but where my mind goes right now is, what the hell did Bert do in his past to make him think that he couldn't get in heaven? It makes me think that he's really deep within the lore of Lumen and its evil deeds. Now, taking a detour to Irvin's house, we cut to Mr. Drummond at his front door as he's about to enter. Now, I want to point out that he must have known that Irv wasn't home by either watching him or he had someone occupy him and knew how long he was going to be away from his house, and I think that person seems to be Bert. Now, another thing I want to talk about is the set of keys he has in his hand. Now, I know some people out there think that this show takes place in a simulation or in the Matrix, and this would make Drummond as the key maker, but putting jokes aside for a second, I think all these keys just shows that he has access to all the Audis' personal homes, and he can go in and out without them knowing, and he keeps tabs or spying on what they may know about the company. This was something we saw Cobell do to Mark back in season 1, which, by the way, where the hell is Cobell? Now, we see him opening a lock and going through Irvin's belongings from the finale. We get another look of the list of the severed employees, and we get a new page where we see this Doug Coleman, who, by the way, got into a car accident, which seems to be a theme of this show. As he turns the page, we've seen this page before as we see Dylan's name, but we also see Bert and his address. Again, this is things we've seen before, so it makes me think, like, what is the code that needs to be cracked in this scene? What's the significance of Drummond being here? I mean, clearly he knows where all the Severance employees live, but I guess the question is, was this Drummond's first time at Irvin's place, and finding this information puts Irv on their radar, which, speaking of radar, where is Radar? Where is Irvin's dog? Why isn't he barking at this stranger in his house? Now we head over to the George household to find Gretchen lying to her husband. Now Dylan's wanting to buy a car, but gets talked out of it, again showcasing what she talked to Annie Dylan about earlier, about him consistently jumping from one thing to another and not being responsible. Now, when the question about how her visit went comes up, she lies and says that it was canceled at the last minute. Now, again, this confirms that what we saw in The Office earlier in the episode was taking place in the same day, but again, I just have a feeling that time will play a big factor into the rest of the story. Now, the big question is, why did she just lie to her husband? She could have simply just told him that it was fine, everything was fine with the Annie version of Dylan, but again, I think her and Annie Dylan had sex in the office that morning, and she clearly is confused on how to tell him. Again, I said this weeks ago, is it technically cheating when you're doing it with your Innie? But I think it implies that your Audie's not good enough or doing enough to make her, I don't know, sexually pleased or just happy in life or happy in this relationship in general. Now, I do think that we're getting closer to seeing Gretchen wanting to spend more time with the other version of Dylan, and this could open up a whole new other can of worms where we may see Innies wanting to replace their Audis, or maybe Gretchen decides to get severed or does something similar to the senator's wife, Gabby, and she maybe gets severed when she's at home with her husband. Now, catching up with Hungry Mark, he's at a different restaurant, a Chinese restaurant, and I think this is the first time that we've seen somewhere other than Pips. Now, it's been pointed out already online because they shared this clip a couple days ago that the song playing in the background is the same song, or at the very least the same tone from season 1, where we remember the scene where Mark told Helly that she was easy to pretend to care about. Now, after devouring a few plates and getting the check, he notices a familiar face that just walked into the restaurant and is no other than Helena Egan, who, by the way, didn't just randomly pop up. Again, Britt's performance is so damn good as both Helly and Helena, as she plays along and walks up to Mark and makes some small talk about meeting him for the first time and him knowing exactly who she is. By the way, this technically isn't the first time that their Audis are meeting in person. Remember season 1, episode 1, towards the end of that episode where Mark almost hit her with his car. She talks about his great work at the company, and he makes a classic Severance joke about not knowing what he does, and surprisingly, Mark is doing a phenomenal job at being coy and playing the part of James Bond undercover perfectly. Now we watch as she apologizes about the OTC era, and from here they have a very flirtatious back and forth forth about Mark meeting her father and being the first one to do so. Now, I want to point out Mark's playing dumb and playing to the fact that he knows that he's being followed, but I truly think Helena was actually flirting with him, especially with the line of Mark being the first guy that her dad can meet. It was almost like, hey, you're my first date or my first boyfriend type of a conversation that they were having, which within itself is a whole conversation because we know that Mark actually technically had sex with her last week. So again, there's just so many layers within this conversation. Now, this is where I kind of got lost within this scene in the best way possible, by the way. I don't know what game Helena is playing in this scene as she brings up the death of his wife, who, by the way, she purposely calls Hannah, knowing damn well that her name was Gemma. Now, Helena mentioning the fact that it was a car accident and Gemma was so young. Was it me, or did you all get the same sense that Helena was testing to see if this was any Mark, like if he would know these facts, right? Or to go even further, maybe she was testing to see if he glitches out and knowing that he's in the middle of the process of being reintegrated. I personally think so, because Lumen's always listening. As we see him give a cough, he heads out, they have a stare off, a very deep stare off, by the way, at one another. And again, I just think that Helena knows more than what she's leading on to. I think she knows exactly what Mark is doing as we see him leave this restaurant. Again, kudos to my boy Mark for not breaking character and playing along with Helena. But again, why on earth would the future CEO of what we're led to believe to be the biggest company in the world and the daughter of the current CEO be in this hole-in-the-wall Chinese restaurant, which, by the way, that's a compliment. If you know, you know. But yeah, they're definitely following Mark, and they have to be seeing just how far along he is in the reintegration process. I love the suspenseful thriller tone that plays in the background this scene when we see Mark leaving in a panic, and also you notice that Helena's driver is sitting out front. As we get near the end of this incredible episode, we head back to Bert's house, as they discuss why Bert and Fields called each other Attila, which, by the way, is the name of this episode. Now, for my history buffs out there, Attila, frequently called the Attila the Hun, was the ruler of Huns from 434 until his death in early 453. Attila the Hun was famous for his military conquest and brutality, which earned him the nickname of Scourge of God. Attila's brutality was so extreme that he employed terror as a weapon, destroying cities and leaving a path of devastation, which instilled a fear in his enemies. Now, knowing what we just talked about and connecting it to Bert saying that he came up with this 10 years ago, but Fields lets out a possible big reveal. Now, Fields corrects Bert by saying that they start calling each other that 20 years ago, not 10 years ago, and he remembers that because they were having drinks with a Lumen partner. Now, Irv, being the smart individual that he is, he catches on with the inconsistency within the story and calls out how the first severed office was open 12 years ago, which Bert agrees and blames Fields misspeaking because of the alcohol. So yeah, Fields is playing with his gloves off and definitely just revealed a lie about Bert and his ties and how long he's been with Lumen. Now, Field goes on about if Bert and Irv had unprotected sex at work and talks about his conversations with their pastor about Annie's experiencing love. So I am very curious to know who this Lumen partner was, because we've been led to believe that Lumen doesn't want employees to be mingling outside of work, so that's strange. I also feel like maybe the Severance program was going on long before the public even knew about it, and I also think that Bert's hiding something from Irving, and I mean both his innie and his outie. Now, our final moments have Mark rushing home and apologizing to Ragabi and agreeing to flood the chip in his head. Now, we watch one of the most, and I'm calling it right now, the most uncomfortable scene of this show by watching and hearing his skull open as she points the longest needle inside his skull and goes through with the process. Now, she said it will be a quick process, and she meant that, as I'm assuming that he's fully reintegrated at this process, or integrated at this point of the show, but he begins to experience his Annie's memories from what him and Helly did earlier, but then it cuts between a quick glimpse of Gemma laying down and Mark suddenly jumping up in a state of confusion. Now, Mark is told that he needs to keep his head as still as possible as Ragabi wants to know what he's experiencing, but unfortunate timing as Devin knocks on the door. Now, to be clear, we all love Devin, we all trust Devin, but I will be remiss if I don't bring up the fact how conveniently she popped up, very similar to how conveniently Helena popped up at the restaurant. Again, we love Devin, we trust Devin, right? Now, she's left him several voicemails and was nervous about him, especially with them doing their spy thing. Now, she wants to share an idea with him that involves Gabby, the senator's wife, who we know was severed during her pregnancy, but Mark doesn't let her finish her sentence, which I personally want to know what her idea was. Now, we see Mark gets an attitude with her about doing something on his own, and he begins glitching again. He complains about some odd smell, and he notices that he can't grab the glass of water and sees Gemma again at Lumen, but we see Miss Casey, but then she turns to Gemma wearing purple, and Mark passes out and starts foaming at the mouth as Wagabi runs upstairs. Now, I'm assuming that Mark is maybe experiencing an aneurysm, possibly because of the liquid interfering with his chip, but the worst part of this scene was that they just left us on a huge cliffhanger, and that is Mark gonna die? Is he alive? Episode 7 cannot get here soon enough. But that is not our final scene of this episode. That is going back to Bert's house as him and Irv say their goodnights. Now, Irv says that he enjoyed this dinner, and we also see Bert make sure to let him know that Fields was drunk when he mentioned that it was 20 years ago with that whole situation with the Lumen employee. Now, Irv would like to do this again, but maybe without having Fields around next time, and we see Bert agrees with this and smiles. Now, as Irv walks to his car, we see this very suspicious look on Bert's face, from him smiling to this look of him hoping that Fields didn't just blow their cover about whatever secrets he's hiding from Irv. I think episode 4 was more of a WTF type of a wonderful experience, and I quite enjoyed that experience for many different reasons, as I explained in my breakdown of that episode. It's definitely in my top 5 favorite episodes of the series, but I believe this episode was more well-rounded of an episode altogether. From the incredible cinematography, the score, the mood, the atmosphere, all top-notch. The writing was incredible, the acting was phenomenal, and the major plot reveals and elements was just all next level to me. From the smaller moments with Milchick and maybe learning where Miss Wong comes from, to Mark and Helly and Helena and the possible baby plot that's going on, from Gretchen and Dylan and Fields and Bert and Irv, and of course that cliffhanger with Mark living or dying, which by the way, I don't think they're going to kill him in the 6th episode, but still, this episode was just perfect and just was a great mixture of everything I love about this show. So there you have it. You all have made it to the end of this week's breakdown. I really appreciate you all, and I always love seeing if you're still here at the end of this episode breakdown. So if you're still here, do me a favor, put in the comments right now, #HoleInTheWall. Please share your thoughts about this episode in the comments below. If you aren't aware, every Monday I share a Severance theory video where I respond and I react to you all's great theories. So by all means, share your major plot points, your ideas, your deeper understandings, and your theories in the comments section below. Now, if you all enjoyed my breakdown, do me a favor, hit that like button. Let's try to get this video to 1,500 likes and spread it all across YouTube. Also, consider sharing this video. And if this is your first time here watching one of my videos, welcome to the channel. Consider sticking around, checking out my other Severance content, and also hit that subscribe button. Now, if you all want to take the support even further, consider joining the channel memberships in the description below. Don't forget, you all are awesome. Stay safe, and remember,
you must abandon childish things. You must grow up. You must grow up.